From its natural ecosystem to all the mixed cultures that share the same place, Venezuela is a country of great diversity. This heterogeneity makes Venezuela almost impossible to describe, but it is also its best and more beautiful characteristic. Beginning from its unique location in the north of South America, Venezuela is characterized by its mountains and plain-face geography. To the north, the extensive coastal mountain region protects the country from natural phenomena, but has high seismic activity. Also, the particular changes in altitude throughout the territory give place to two important climatic periods, the dry and the rainy season. This has a direct impact on hydrography basins, of which Venezuela has 7 important. The Orinoco and the Caroni rivers stand out. Here are hydroelectric plants that supply energy to most of the country's cities. In the coastal mountain region between the city of Caracas and Valencia, there are valleys that allow the formation of reservoirs for human consumption, such as the La Mariposa Reservoir. These sources of water, the fertile soil, and its proximity to the coast provided the ideal conditions for accelerated urban growth, being fragmented by the topography and creating urban islands. As they are located in valleys, they tend to be affected by flooding and landslides. In the case of Caracas, the Guaire River, which crosses the West-East Valley, allows runoff to be channeled and avoiding major flooding. Despite these dangers, slopes tend to be the greatest risk because they are highly populated. The mountainous landscape contains the Valley of Caracas and the Greenbelt, generating a good climate that benefits the city. These places are mostly used for recreational activities, sports, cultural centers, conservations, and the protection of biological diversity and natural resources. The Ávila National Park, the Macarao National Park, and the Protective Zone are part of this greenbelt. These national parks, along with the metropolitan ones, provide shelter for an extensive number of migratory birds in search of food. The best known are the guacamayas, colorful birds that constantly fly over the city, but are product of illegal traffic, and the introduction of species generates alterations to the ecosystem balance. As part of the protective zone, we find Baruta, a municipality with a climate similar to Caracas, but with higher humidity levels. It began as an agricultural town, due to the potential of the land for crops. Baruta has a surface where an abrupt relief predominates, with high slopes and narrow valleys. Here are different ecological and landscape resources of great value, such as the ecological reserve of the Simón Bolívar University and the military zone, which is highly guarded and not everyone has access to it, and no constructions are allowed nearby. The natural conditions are presented as an opportunity to provide spaces for urban agriculture, where sharing and interchange of education between communities can happen, as a way to use the existing natural resources correctly and to revive the rural activities that have been part of the Venezuelan legacy since pre-colonization.
The next part is the economic factors that affect urban forms. The beginning of Venezuela's urban history starts with the native tribe settlements. Their houses were built with diverse forms and of natural material. They adapt to environments such as water, climate, and temperatures. They earn their living by hunting and collecting. The indigenous also cultivated crop on terrace fields and controlling the rivers by reservoirs. Their architecture is temporarily built, but is shown a great understanding of nature and a high capacity for adaptations. With Spanish arrival, colonial towns appeared. Most of them settled on native land, and it was the beginning of an agricultural economy, where cacao became the main crop. During this period, the economy gets centralized in Caracas. The Indian law also emerged. Indian law, which managed the territories, were possibly the first law about human rights. The law of Indians also determined the urban forms. All the cities founded in this period follow a great urban plot. In Caracas, These great cities were established at the flat area of the valley, and the plaza was the center of social events. Colonization also brought mixed culture, blending into the local. At the end of the colonial period, a war began inspired by French Revolution. The inequity of Spanish government triggered people's desire to fight for independence. Although independence brought about freedom and new international commercial pattern, the price was very high due to wars. The agricultural activity stopped and the economy fell into a huge crisis that would take decades to fix. The Republican period was marked as a period of dictatorship and extreme poverty. These are the years of the country relying on agriculture and pasture to recover from the crisis. As the country economy was based on agricultural activities, the urban growth wasn't obvious. A great part of the city was occupied by pasture land that were later used to expand the city. One of them was the future land of Simon Bolivar University. At the beginning of the 20th century, Venezuela suffered a huge economic transformation from an agricultural economy to an oil exporting country. The dramatic economic change led to the country to oil boom and immigration wave, both external and internal, which caused cultural shifting and urbanization. The agricultural landscape gradually disappeared and cities formed from rural to urban. Meanwhile, Venezuela became an Americanized modern country due to the intervention of the United States. Oil-based economy allowed the government rich enough to build urban infrastructures, such as new roads, public space, as well as building in new land. The city's infrastructure improved and the first official urban planning for the new city appeared. It prioritized the design of a road system and natural space. The urban growth caused the physical and social fragmentation of the city. In Caracas, 46% of informal settlers only take less than 25% of the land for living, leading to the high density of this area. In order to get more space for development, the informal settlement expanded outside the valley, breaking the urban grid and organically climbing the hill on the edge of the former city, no matter how steep is the slope. In this period, to have a better quality of life, some informal settlements always occupied the vacant land in the metropolitan area, making this dramatic image. Informal settlements are where social inequity and poverty happened. This part is about the social crisis behind oil economy. In the 1970s, the oil boom faced with crisis. The drop of international oil price caused the fall of the country's economy, along with devaluation of the currency, inflation, corruption, abuse of power, which flowed in a series of protests and riots. Country fell into one of its most dark periods. In the 21st century, the Venezuela oil-based economy has collapsed into a deep crisis again because of the social welfare program and the decrease of oil price and production, leading the nation to drug trading, illegal mining, slow urban development, and lack of infrastructure maintenance. Also, the Venezuela's new allies in the socialism camp, such as Cuba and Russia, have led to important change, such as price control policies, nationalization plans, social housing plans, feeding programs, and the creation of community councils and municipal councils. Although the government's policies were targeted to solve people's living problems and guarantee social equity, they actually emphasize the difference between the poor and rich people, which creates the intense social conflict between them. The lack of proper policy and the neglect of the urban infrastructure spot problems affecting people's daily lives, being the biggest problem in informal villages. For example, their water supply system was temporarily built by themselves, causing the unstable water supply and improper management of the sewage water. In addition to water pollution, it also results in serious social problems such as the lack of drinking water and illness. Some organizations try to bring clean water to this area, but it is a huge project. In informal areas, it exists an electricity network. However, it was unofficially built, and electricity wire is exposed to the public space, making the light unstable and unsafe. The lack of public lighting makes it unsafe to walk at night, so there is no nightlife in these areas. Some measure has been taken, like a project named Security Tables, where people from the community cooperate with the municipal police of Baruta. Hyperinflation, dysfunction of service companies, the fall in oil production and price, and corruption of government make the Venezuela's economy collapse. Finally became a humanity crisis in the countries. Food has become a luxury that not everyone can afford. That's why community kitchens appear in Caracas barrios, including Baruta. Also, there are some urban farming projects to help the community become self-sufficient. But consider the urban space are too limited to cover all the food needs. There is a long way to go.
Baruta shares the particular topography of Caracas, abrupt grooves along the land where the creeks flow. The municipality lands have great vegetation, biodiversity, and climate, but it is also the special topography and natural characteristics that are the conditionals of physical fragmentation. While the formal city developed in plain and flat areas of the valley, informal areas have landed where topography is steep. As well, the particular surface and protected areas that establish limits for these settlements and separates them from each other. This condition creates urban islands. In Baruta, most of them are residential areas, but there are also industrial and educational areas and the Baruta town that concentrates the majority of commercial, recreational, and social uses. Another cause of physical fragmentation is transportation and connectivity systems. As not all the urban routes are connected, it is necessary for several transportation lines to move from the urban centers to far urbanizations and vice versa. This distance is accentuated by the poor transportation accessibility, being difficult to move from residential areas to the center of the city. As a mostly residential area, Baruta has few public transportation routes to move to Caracas's urban center. In the study site, the zone closer to the center of Baruta has better access to transportation, while the remote zones are more difficult to reach. In this way, informal villages have poor transportation access and few intervehicular roads. The predominance of transportation in Baruta is automobile. There is not a continuous system of pedestrian streets that could connect the different areas. This is a common characteristic between the formal housing and informal villages. There is also a lack of public recreational spaces. Throughout history, plazas have been an important cultural part of the communities as urban public centers. In the center of the town of Baruta, there is a main plaza surrounded by some of the most important buildings in the site. Due to the different ground conditions and fragmentation, there are not public centers inside informal villages. Nevertheless, they are full of interactions. Informal villages are urban ecosystems. Villages auto-constructed that are capable of continuous adaptation. They don't have the defined urban form. The structures rise with the topography in an organic urban fabric, forming a dense high mass of surrounding the city, making them part of the landscape. Every informal settlement is different, and to get inside their characteristics, we are going to use La Palomera, located in the site of study as a reference. The land use in informal villages is mostly residential. People built vertical structures with several floors occupied by different families. In the top floor, some buildings have terraces under construction for vertical expansion. Besides, people usually adapt to the ground floor to commercial uses. Despite there not being any vehicular roads inside the informal village, pedestrian streets are really important. They are adapted to the topography and connect every part of the village. These streets in some parts are modified for motorcycles, the only vehicle that can get into these villages. Nevertheless, the characteristics of these streets, it is really hard to evacuate or get inside during an emergency. Because of the high urban density, there is not a lot of space for community recreation. In La Palomera, there are small residual spaces for community activities. And also, pedestrian streets have strong social meaning as a meeting place. Due to the lack of services, poor environmental laws, and unconscious human activities that have affected the topography and the principal creeks of Baruta. In the last 80 years, topography modifications have been made for urban planning purposes, such as La Limonera site, where cutting slopes and large volumes of fill have been done, usually without being properly stabilized, so they're especially vulnerable to landslides. The natural flows have been affected by this use of land due to erosive processes, excessive organic and inorganic sediments into the waterways, and water pollution. These factors change the river habitat, which generates excess runoff or a lack of flow. La Guairarita is the main water channel of the mountains creeks of Manzanares, Ojo de Agua, and Sartenejas. Illegally, wastewater from informal settlements such as Barrio Ojo de Agua and Los Picapiedras is discharged here, causing bad odors and health problems to the communities during the dry season. The main challenge of the study site is the fragmentation due to a series of infrastructure issues such as geological characteristics, connectivity, water source, and energy source, as well as social and economic factors. Even though these factors represent the main challenges for our site, they are also great opportunities. Since the country's only source of income failed, the community's demands for self-sufficient solutions. Taking back to our roots to look for future sustainable models more related with the environment and the local communities where nature, structures, and people work together in order to adapt to all of the heterogeneity. The country has become resilient, and a place where teamwork and empathy with neighbors has not only allowed the union as a community, but also the preservation of the rich and diverse culture full of values that we have obtained throughout the years. Every informal village is different. The diversity and its dynamics make them function as their own ecosystem. Venezuelans have a strong sense of belonging. People from different social classes and origins work every day to improve their communities, sharing the same problems and looking collectively for solutions. So as planners, we ask, what knowledge can we learn from the crisis as strategies to apply in Baruta? What can we learn from Venezuelan natives regarding sustainability and self-sufficiency to be applied in present-day communities? What kind of spaces have more potential to socially connect both the informal and informal settlements? Which plans can be implemented to control formal and informal settlements as they grow together? Can the greenbelt be a limitation? Considering its natural characteristics, what limitations are imposed on Baruta and the neighborhoods regarding urban development? How do we make safer places against erosion and instability? Can nature provide these solutions? How can the multidimensional cultural and ethnic identities be preserved and uplifted with new interventions? And here we have the incredibly talented and devoted team that made all of this possible.